What is up, everyone? My name's Godin, or Jeff from GreatLakes-TCG, coming at you with a 8.5 Purple Luffy deck guide. Now, this has been a long time in the making. I've been trying to do a lot of testing and try to get some information and statistics for people, so I don't just put out, my thoughts again in another, basically in another video. I'm gonna try my best to teach you, the way I think Purple Luffy should be played, and I think the deck list that I have kind of come up with has some merit, given it's very similar to that 10-0 Swiss winning Purple Luffy from yesterday. But I need to be honest with you guys. Purple Luffy is not as strong as it was in 8.0. Blue Doffy's introduction to the meta has kind of shifted things where aggro deck is now the best deck, and that's kind of our boogeyman. We were having a lot of trouble with Zoro back in 8.0, but it wasn't widely played because it was shut out by the black decks. Blue Doffy does not have that problem, and in fact it's actually super consistent, so it's not like you're going to high roll or low roll and kind of try to win. On average, 8-9 out of 10 games they're going to see their Jinbei plays. So Purple Luffy's in this situation where, to keep up with that aggression, you are kind of living or dying by seeing the trio, essentially Zoro, Luffy, Sanji. On curve, mind you, so on your 7-dawn turn, it's really important to kind of play out this combo, or else the deck feels like it just falls or lags behind in being able to keep up with Blue Doffy. And this is kind of similar against other decks. Now, it's not as significant to hit it on curve, but it feels like if you aren't hitting the Luffy-Tarou combo on curve, you are losing a lot of what makes this deck really, really powerful. And so say you don't see your curve, that's when you start seeing a lot of these inconsistencies with the deck, and why some people are saying they're killing it, they're running hot 10-0, and while some people are probably falling behind. Alright, let's get into the deck profile. Essentially speaking, it's going to be very quick. You guys know these cards, you've seen most of them, and the ratios are very similar to a deck list I posted a few days ago. Essentially speaking, I'm not playing 5 Queen and I'm not playing 7 Kid. 5 Queen kind of gotten replaced by O-Nami, and it's just not consistent enough with the deck. It's funny that I say that because Queen draws cards, right? It replaces itself and cycles. The issue is Queen was great when we were turboing to 10 Dawn, then playing 2 5 costs out, and then playing a big body after. In this deck, we're turboing to 7, and instead of ramping on 7 with Poly in the past, we are now Dawn minusing. And so we don't actually get to that 10 or 9 Dawn play where we could play out 2 bodies and cycle at the same time as conveniently. And so I found Queen a little awkward to play, because when I get to that 9 or 10 Dawn turn, I already have my board established, and I want to play out my Kaido, and I want to play out my Linlin. So that's why if I actually dropped Queen from the deck and opted more for O-Nami, who kind of does the same thing. Now, when talking about why I don't play 7 cost Kid, I don't think it's worth it to make your Doffy matchup better, but make every other matchup worse. And so that's kind of the main reason. It's unfortunate because I know how good it is in 7 Kid, or sorry, in Doffy, specifically if you can get 2 of them down. I think that's kind of like the win condition. But we can still establish, and with this deck, I think I've made it up to like a 50-50 matchup at best. And I'm very happy with the way this deck performs against other decks still. Now, one bit of confirmation bias, and I'm very happy that this actually happened. Just yesterday, a Luffy went 10-0 with a deck list that's very similar to mine. And I don't know how well he did today. It's towards the end of the day. I actually could look it up. But essentially speaking, 10-0 is no small feat, especially with Purple Luffy in this meta. So looking at his deck list, I actually have it pulled up right here. You can see we run almost, the exact same list, save for 2 cards. I play the Searcher event at 2. He does not play the Searcher event. Instead, he plays a 3rd Kaido and a 4th Magellan. That's kind of it. I don't think either list is better or worse than the other. I think the skeleton is there. It's 90% the same. I'm just happy that he came to the same conclusion as me, that Queen and 7 Kid are not needed in this deck, and he probably plays the deck very similarly to the way I do and approaches matchups the same way. That said, let's get into the matchup profile. All right, getting into the matchups, I'm going to make this super quick. I think a lot of the matchups are fairly simple to play because it just takes experience. You have to play the deck and get more reps in for you to do better and understand what I'm saying here. That said, if you are still having trouble with this deck, even after this guide, feel free to reach out on Discord. I answer all my questions. And also, if you are really still struggling, feel free to DM me for coaching. I'm super cheap. And I essentially, like, almost everyone I've coached has given me positive feedback that I actually help them get better at the game. And we work towards achieving their goals. Anyway, short plug, getting into the play lines. Going first is typically better if you can, but it really depends on the matchup. I would say that if you go first, you're kind of locked into one thing. You have to find the Luffy-Tarou. If you don't find the Luffy-Tarou, you're not gonna fucking do well going first. There is some play lines where you could like drop on clay and then you'll ramp to 8, like drop on clay for 4, ramp to 8, and then play another 4 cost. Sometimes it's a blocker law. That play can be fine. Depends on the deck, because like against Bonney, it's not really that strong because they can just rest your Bon Clay before it even does anything and swing into it, or vice versa. But by the time you're playing this, either way, really depends on the deck. But that's typically your going first curve is going to 7, and then after you drop Luffy-Tarou, then you could do a Bon Clay 5 drop or just double 4 drop like I just discussed, or you could ramp and even play a 9 cost 9 mom if you have it in hand, if you've already gone wide. That said, going second, things get a little bit different. Now the deck is worse going second, especially in 09, but I don't think it's that bad. Really, the deck can, because it plays Magellan, the deck can kind of adapt to going first or second. Now, I will always say this. I play the deck as if I'm not going to see Magellan. I play the deck as if I'm going to get absolutely destroyed. I'm going to low roll. I won't see my Magellans. So I still take away the favored curve from the opponent. Yes, if I see Magellan, it does make it that I might give the opponent the better curve if I play it. But typically, I could potentially see a second Magellan. But typically, Magellan's also a card that kind of sticks on the field. And so even if I play it, it's a body that's not leaving, even if I'm giving my opponent the better curve. So there's positives and negatives to it. Regardless, if you don't see Magellan, then, or if you see it too late, then going second still benefits you, depending on the deck. Now, usually when you go second, you want to drop 5 cost Kid or Magellan into either Luffy-Tarou or 2 other bodies like I discussed, and then you play a 9 mom. If you have 5 cost Kid into Luffy-Tarou, you don't have to, you could play the 9 cost right away. The deck has changed since 8.0 because we're adding 9 moms. We typically can go late. And because we have a lot of draw power with San-Gorou and with O-Nami, the deck can actually play late game a lot better than it did before, but typically you have to see your top end for that to happen. Unfortunately, our top end right now is not searchable, unless you play the 10 cost Luffy. So because of that, it's easier to say that going late and kind of mini starving your opponent can be a play that's viable, and I'll talk about that in a second, the mini starve aspect. Now, I will say that if you have Luffy-Tarou and Magellan on 7 and you're going first, I would usually play Luffy-Tarou and then Magellan, because you could still lock out people into the 7, like they'll be locked the 7 dawn turn. Finally, test out new play lines, especially on the sim. Don't be afraid to make unconventional plays. That's how you kind of get people in ways that they're not expecting. And typically, when you put someone in a position that they haven't been in before, that's when they tend to fluster and they make mistakes. Now, going into the actual matchups. First is Doflamingo. Doflamingo is the only matchup I would split into first and second curves, because typically you will see people fluster if they don't get their going first curve. It's a little bit harder going second personally, but I think if you see the right plays, going second is actually better, and I'll discuss that in a second. So currently for Doflamingo, you have to mulligan for your Luffy-Tarou combo. It's kind of without a doubt the best 7 Dawn play you could make. Put out Luffy-Tarou into San-Gorou, and then you could follow it up with either another Luffy-Tarou, playing out 2 bodies, one of them being a blocker because it gives you some stability and some, recycling and some draw power, and then you play 9 moms after. You would always want to play around pudding. For me personally, I try to be between 5 and 6 cards in hand if I can. Sometimes I'm risking it with 7 cards in hand, but those turns, usually if they play pudding, it's not the end of the world. It means they're not playing a Jinbei into Boa. So that there's pluses and minuses there. Now, for Doflamingo, and this will be true going second curve, you always want to go for board. Once you go for board, you can kind of just kill them in 2 turns almost. You can go from they'll go from 6 life to 2 life in 1 turn, and then 2 life to lethal in the next turn, once you've cleared their board. Do remember about Perfume Femur. Perfume Femur is really a strong play, especially when used with 2-cost Teach, because then they'll play Perfume, make it unblockable, use that 2 Dawn that they basically rested for Perfume with Teach, and then basically they're swinging with 12 Dawn that turn. Really strong. Always watch out for it. Remember, you could always drop 4-drop Kamazo on 4 if your hand is just bricked and full of counters, because sometimes Luffy will not just brick with no counter, but also brick with nothing but 2Ks. You'll draw multiple Uso-Hachi, multiple O-Nami essentially, and so Kamazo could be a good 4-Dawn turn at that point, because it can be used to kill a bunch of Doffy's little bodies, and then from there it kind of stops his ability to kind of recoup those searchers and recoup Teach and stuff, and use all their ability over and over. Now, going second, it's harder because you need to be more specific with your mulligan. You're not just mulliganing for Luffy-Tarou, you want to mulligan for 5-cost Kid. The reason being is if you play 5-cost Kid, typically it sticks, and you can use it to kind of block our 1K instead of throwing out your 2Ks, or just block our 2K whenever Doffy inevitably does like a 7K swing, right? The issue is, or the reason why it's so good, is because when you Luffy-Tarou that next turn, you don't have to ramp. You can. It depends on the plays you want to make. It really depends on the hand. But you don't have to ramp with leader ability that turn, which saves you a life, to play 9 Mom the turn after. So you can Luffy-Tarou, and then you'll go back to 7 Dawn, and then you can 9 Mom the turn after. And so getting 9 Mom out early against Doffy is really nice, because it gives you a body that 1 sticks, 2 by playing it that turn early, that tempo swing back to you is huge, especially because you've already had 5 Kid, Luffy, and hopefully either Zoro or Sanji out the turn before. By the time you play 9 Mom, that's your 4th body on curve, and you're removing an active body that they have, because by then they found out that you're swinging at all their rested bodies. So now they'll start trying to play things super active and leaving them open, and they'll just attack all at once in 1 turn. But then that 9 Mom makes that so much harder for them to accomplish, especially if they play Jozu in response to your San-Gorou and then you 9 Mom them. It's so good. Either way, I would also say that you can consider countering the first attack to dodge pudding, especially when going second, because typically you're drawing that extra card, so you could do a 2K, 1K. Typically I will do that, because then that means I don't have to worry about pudding the rest of the game. Now, once again, I did just mention doing a mini starve against Doflamingo. What that means is I sometimes, depending on my hand and depending on how good my hand is, I will not attack them on my, even going first or second, I will not attack them. I'll only attack rested characters. If they don't play a rested character, I don't attack that turn. And I wait. The reason being is, Blue Doffy, if they're good, will take every hit until they're down to 3 life-ish. Sometimes 2 life even. Because they need those cards in hand, it gives them a lot more decisions to make. It lets them see more pieces, see more Jinbei, and be more aggressive. So And typically they don't mind having a big hand against Purple Luffy, because even if you block her Law, it's really not the end of the world. They're able to recycle a lot of things with their Moria. So I found, and it's not by a large margin, but I found that actually doing a little mini starve until you kind of win board by at least like 3 or more characters is actually more beneficial for you. Then once you have 3 or more characters or 4 or more characters on board and you're like swinging 3 or 4 times a turn, they really can't just take the life anymore. You know, they have to start respecting those swings, and they'll have to give you their hand to kind of make up for it. And that's kind of the best. That's kind of that sweet spot you want to be in. Hopefully, it's usually the turn that you're dropping 9 mom or the turn after you drop 9 mom where you get that sweet spot. Once again, win board, push for game. All right, Lucci. This is really funny because honestly, personally, I think Lucci is one of the easiest matchups for Purple Luffy still. And I know it's such a good deck. I know a lot of people love the deck, but personally, I think Lucci is really not that hard to play against. Why? We still play the Magellan. We still play Bonclays. If Bonclay's not respected, it's swinging for 9 the next turn. If we go second and we play Magellan on curve, then we kind of lock them, and then or if you're able to lock them into like playing Jack, like play like 2 Magellans or whatnot, you lock them out of Jack, or if you only have a 4 cost on the field and they can only or Jack can only hit a 4 cost on the field. So if you have any 5 cost character, your kids, your Magellans, your San-Gorous, they're all kind of safe on that 7 dawn turn. So even when they get there, they really don't have anything to do. If they want to play Jack, they have to go for Ice Age Lucci strats. Typically, the only time I lose this matchup, and it's really, really rare, the only time I lose this matchup is if I either completely brick, like really brick, no Magellans, no Bonclays, no top end. It's really just a bunch of 2Ks, O-Namis, some blocker laws. Like if I that it happens, but it is what it is. Or if I Luffy-Tarou San-Gorou on play, then they double Ice Age into Lucci. That is like the only losing play the only time I've ever actually lost to Lucci. A majority of the time, they don't have that. And that's only when I'm going first, by the way. If I'm going second and I drop a Magellan and then I Luffy-Tarou after, it's like perfect. Like you just don't lose. Because that Magellan sticks, it gives you, and you can just keep Luffy-Tarouing after. They're gonna run. They already wasted 2 Ice Ages just to, get rid of the first, Luffy-Tarou curve, and you're playing another one. It just kills them. Biggest thing is count the 2Ks when you're doing, math. I like to swing 6s a bunch, and I think our deck is really still good at swinging 6, which is what Luffy was really good at doing back in 8.0 was swing 6, because everything we played was a 5 cost 6K or a 4 cost 6K vanilla. Swing with your blockers. A lot of people will play blocker law or play 5 cost kid and not swing with them. If you're still playing queens in your deck, swing with them. It really helps. Against Lucci, because we're playing 9 mom now, we could easily go down to 2 or 1 life and sit there, and they won't really be able to aggress us, because the second I get down to 1 life, I play 9 mom, go back up to 2, and I'm completely out of their, and I'm able to pop a Lucci back into their life or a Sabo back into their life, and I'm out of lethal range completely. That's how you play the deck. I will say swinging into Jack helps. I would say, being able to say play a Kaido, pop a Rebecca, then swing into Jack, or pop a Lucci, swing into Jack. That's sometimes acceptable. Just be careful with playing Kaido early, because playing Kaido generally means you're gonna set yourself back, and it's best saved for when you're going for game, or if you are the Lucci's hand size is low and you're able to clear 2 bodies by playing Kaido, popping something, swinging into something else, and that kind of puts you out of lethal range. And they are, their hand size is low, so it's not like they're able to recoup or answer that Kaido well. BY Luffy, the other kind of most played deck in the meta. Essentially speaking, for BY Luffy, the plan is very similar. It's actually a better matchup for us than it was before. The reason being is if you see Magellan, you play it the same way as you did before. You see Magellan, you keep them, you force them to activate, keep them on 0 life, keep forcing them to use their kids in hand to activate, and you kind of just win the game by keeping them from being able to play Moria. They just run out of resources. But now we unlocked another path, so to speak, to beat them, and that's with using a Luffy-Tarou combo on curve. So if say you end up going first or second, doesn't really matter, but say you end up going first and you drop Luffy-Tarou, the turn after you Luffy-Tarou, it'll be an 8 or 9 Dawn, depending on if you want to take leader ability. You'll have 3 bodies on board, because say you like Luffy-Tarou say you Zoro-Juurou into Luffy-Tarou into San-Gorou, say you get that, like, you hit the trio, you'll be in a position where you can, like, and they'll usually be at 2 life by now, because you swing at them the turn 1 and then you swing at them twice turn 2. Then you play out the Luffy-Tarou and the San-Gorou. So they'll typically be at 2 life by now, sometimes even 1 life, depending on how aggressively they want to take. And then you could do something super cheeky by swinging a vanilla 5 when they're at 2 life, and 9 times out of 10 they'll take. For some reason they always take it. And if they give you a counter, sorry, not a vanilla 5, a 6, swing a 6, because you're doing 2 things when you swing a 6 when they're at 2 life. One, they either have to take the life, and you've invested 0 Dawn in that 6k swing because it's one of your characters. Usually you could do the San-Gorou, and the San-Gorou will draw you a card so you can see what your options are. But 2, you're asking for a 2k in their hand. Typically they have it, sometimes they don't. But usually they don't want to give you that 2k. For some odd reason, they want to hold it just in case. If it's their only lone 2k, they will not give it to you, because usually it's a activator, and so if you leave them at 1 life, they want to use it. They want to be able to use it. So it's actually really cool. But so you swing a 6. Most of the time they'll take it. If they don't have a 2k, they're taking it. If they want to give you the 2k, perfect. That's fine. That's what you want. Then you swing another 6. No Dawn investment yet. That's the big thing. Typically, like I said, they're going to take one of these. If they're at 1 life, this is even better. Typically, they're going to take one of these 6k swings. Typically. Then they're down to 1 life and you have 2 swings left. Usually it's leader ability, usually it's leader and Luffy-Tarou. What I do here is usually swing 9 with Luffy-Tarou. A majority of the time, if they've given you, and you could do 6, 7, 9, by the way, that's fine too. It's just less punishing. Like it's fine, right? Typically they don't have the 2ks to answer a 9, so they take it. They're down to 0 life as a 5k leader, and you have minimum 7, 8 Dawn to work with. You load that shit up on leader, you swing, you drain their whole hand. I've actually one game I've won using this. It's actually awesome. So essentially speaking, you can kind of turbo them to 0 and then force a really big swing by just swinging really well. The biggest thing is, like, that first 6k swing, they'll either typically take or counter. If they take, you can kind of win the game. If they counter, that's a 2k out of hand, then you follow up with a 7. If they counter that 7, you stop swinging for the turn. If they counter that 7, you stop swinging for the turn, you play out another Luffy-Tarou, or you play out a Magellan, you play out something else, you play out a blocker, doesn't matter. But that's your cue to stop. So you go 6, then 7. If they counter, you stop. That's it. Because that's 3 cards out of their hand, and they stay at 2 life, you grow your board, and you go again the next turn. Because the next turn, unless they're able to self-activate with 2 cards, and they can do that, but typically that means they're going to be a 9k 0 life, and if they're self-activating, they won't be able to play Sabos usually, and if they do have Sabos, it's fine, because you have an Uso-Hachi in hand to play it, rest that Sabo, and now you have 4 characters, and you have 7 Dawn to swing, 11s at them. So you could probably, it'll be Luffy, so hopefully you'll have 2 Luffy-Tarous out there. So you could just split them 3 and 4 each and just swing 11s. And then the Sabo that you rested, your San-Gorou and your Zoro-Juurou could just swoop ping 6s at it, you know, and it's usually fine. Next, Bonney. Going first is preferred. Why? Because if they play, say, Carrot on curve, it can get kind of nasty. And so we really want to be able to, or even like, you know, sometimes it's not Carrot, sometimes it's even Cavendish into Carrot. It gets nasty. Carrot's really annoying for us. And the reason why Bonney actually is, so while BY got easier, Bonney got harder because Carrot can rest everything that we play, except for like 9 Mom and Kaido. You want to go wide as fast as possible, which means aggressively mulliganing for Luffy-Tarou, and then you can go Luffy-Tarou, so you can go 4 cost Luffy-Tarou into Magellan, and that will usually win you the game. Why? Because Bonney cannot, because if you Magellan, then Bonnie's unable to aggressively answer that because she's getting set, she's losing her, you know, second, how do I say it? She's losing her going second curve, which means it delays her Captain Kid, delays her Kaido, or sorry, not Kaido, it delays her Doffy, and the 10 drop Doffy is really how we lose this matchup. It's not the Shanks, even though Shanks is annoying, you can play around it. It's not anything else, it's really just that 10 drop Doffy that kind of locks up your field, especially if they're able to get 2 out. That's when you start having the losing side of that matchup. So it's really important for you to go wide as fast as possible, and then be very wary of, some of them are teching Electrical Luna, some of them are teching the 9 Shanks. Otherwise, Kaido is the biggest, you know, boogeyman for Bonney. This is the only match where I'll say I have won many games turboing to 10 and then turboing to 9, 10, dropping Kaido, popping a Carrot, and then I win from there. The reason being is Bonney has a hard time removing anything like outside of Shanks, and so if you drop a Kaido early, it basically can answer everything she does, you know, for the rest of the game. One thing I will say, the biggest thing, like, you know, because Bonney can't actually, you know, pop anything, it can only rest things. Playing blockers against Bonney is really strong, especially like those O-Namis, and like or like blocker law, and just leaving them up. It's kind of nice, especially towards the late game, because it's an anti-Doffy tech, but also it, because Bonney kind of, you know, little snowballs at the very end, it kind of forces her to play Hody, and typically she can't afford to play Hody because you have her on a timer because of how many bodies and how fast you play out with the Luffy-Tarous. Once again, Magellan's always your friend because, you know, Bonney can't really swing into it. And once again, double Doffy is like the only way we lose this, especially if you go wide fast enough. If she hits a Carrot or 2 and they stick, you lose. That's kind of it. You lose. You kind of just shake your partner's hand and go on. Now, the mirror. I want to talk about this really quickly. Going first or second doesn't really matter in the mirror. Going first, I think, is better, only because of the way tempo works. But I really feel like it's whoever sees the right cards. For instance, if I'm going second and I play Magellan on 5, which I think is the right play, except if my opponent plays their Magellan on 5. Now we're in a situation where, or their Magellan on their follow-up turn, because now we're in a situation where I locked them out of Luffy-Tarouing by making them lose a Dawn, but they locked me out of my Luffy-Tarou in response. So now I'm the one playing behind, not them. Unless I'm able to respond with another Magellan but I don't even think that locks them out because you gain 2 Dawn a turn. So with the Dawn math, it doesn't even work. So now I'm playing from behind. I found that playing 5 cost Kid is fine, going second, and then you can Magellan them, but that is a little harder now because if they Luffy-Tarou, because that allows it to Luffy-Tarou on curve, and if they Luffy-Tarou on curve and then you play Magellan, it's kind of shit. So the Magellan play works if they don't have a Magellan to Magellan you back, So then you lock them out of Luffy-Tarou, you Magellan into your own Luffy-Tarou, so then you have the wide board first before they're able to play their wide board. And then you're able to, they'll play something in response, probably their own Luffy-Tarou, but then you play Kaido. And then you pop their Sanji or Zoro, swing into something else, whatever they played on 4. And like you'll see like how it kind of goes back and forth depending on the Magellans, and it goes back and forth. It really favors who gets to play the Luffy-Tarou first. It really favors who actually establishes their board first. And who sees more top end. Getting down the first Kaido kind of really dictates the game a lot. It's a huge tempo swing. And I will say, if you do get down the Kaido, try to play out 2 blockers like an O-Nami Sanji, because you'll probably be lower than them by 2 Dawn. So like an O-Nami or Sanji blocker, like back to back, basically wins you the game. Because once again, Luffy's really bad at getting, like, we are really bad at getting rid of blockers outside of like Kaido or Linlin. And typically you don't want a Linlin in that matchup, because that will like cause, like, it's kind of a race to win board but also hit life. Enel. So this is like our easiest matchup by far. It's Doffy's boogeyman, but it's our savior. Why? And this is why Purple Luffy has a shot in this meta, even though I think it's lost its spark. And I'm probably switching to Enel because of how good, or how much, I think Enel has a really good matchup into Blue Doffy, which I think is the most played deck in the meta, but also BY Luffy. I think Enel surprised a lot of BY Luffys. If you play it right, it can surprise you. BY Luffy has to really draw well or just be really experienced to do well into Enel. And also, Enel has this skill check thing where people still don't know how to play against it. So it'll be easier to get into top cuts, but you might not win the whole tournament with Enel because you'll start hitting, better skilled players. But I'm not really playing in anything in 8.5 anyway, so biggest thing is, and I do want to say, the 3rd place Enel is from our locals, so I'm really happy that he ended up picking Enel and doing well with it. The 3rd place from Madison. So against Enel, you want to go first, but you have to watch out because there are ways to lose, even though it's super favored for us. They can pop 5-cost bodies. They have Nami and they have Gidatsu, some of them. But Gidatsu really can't hit you because you're going to be turboing your leader, your life. But they also have the Rocket Luffy, and they have Yamato's, especially if they have life. So you're gaining life with 9 Mom. So like you'll get in situations where your 5-cost and 4-cost bodies are going to get popped very easily, usually, unless you just turbo down to 1 life and they turbo down to 1 life, and then you're kind of safe. The biggest, playmakers in this deck, and against Enel in general, is play your bodies and then don't swing with them until you have 4 swings available and Enel's on 1 life. Why? That extra swing kind of factors for the bullshit Enel can play. Now, the only way you lose with this is if the last life is 0 cost, but this does play around beige, or unless it's double beige or whatever. The more swings, the better, honestly. But I would say I don't start swinging my characters at least until Enel's at 1 life with 4 swings. That's the only time I'll start swinging. Otherwise, my characters stay standing. Once you do swing, say you hit that scenario and you start swinging, if Enel gives you counter, stop swinging. That's it. Don't rest any more characters. Use the rest of that Dawn to play blockers and play more characters. That's it. You want to whittle their hand down as they give you counter, but say you have 5 swings now. Now you could swing 2 things, and if he gives you counter twice, you stop swinging. And then you rinse and repeat the next turn, and then you go ahead and play bodies. What I will say is, usually I swing 7s, at least as the first swings, because I want him to give me counter. If he takes the life, you swing basically another 7. It's really just simple math. But you want to make him give you counter out of hand, or he's going to lose. Essentially, it's kind of the game plan. Once you start getting to the late game, I would say playing around 1 life by having multiple blockers is probably better for you. because Enel can't really pop. So you get them out of range of being able to be popped by Yamato, and so it kind of protects you from both the Yamato and Ace plays. And so if you're able to aggressively keep them at 0 life, like, you know, swing through, get them to 0 life, so they have to play a Yamato or Ace or Kata to kind of recoup that life, or they just die the next turn, that's kind of the sweet spot to win them, even if you end up losing early game and you need to get them to late game. Either way, that's all the matchups. Once again, hit me up, leave me feedback, ask me questions on Discord. I'm very, very active in the Purple Luffy Discord as well, and I'm available for coaching. And please, please, please subscribe. We will be doing interviews with the first place Bonney from Madison, the third place Enel from Madison, and the fifth place Blue Doffy from Madison.